Almost all of you.
Oh.
Oh, wow. Shout out, let's see, where we from?
Give me a hand, y'all.
Yeah.
We're from Hartford, Connecticut. Me and my
Connecticut.
wife. It's
All right, good brother.
All right.
a pleasure to be here, meet you from.
Brooklyn, New York.
All right.
All right.
All right.
Kansas City, Kansas.
Whoa!
Stop that. Des Moines, Iowa.
Whoa!
Newcastle, Delaware.
Ah!
My way up to New Jersey.
No.
Okay, we're about, okay. This Facebook, if anybody's been watching on Facebook, Facebook has gotten real crazy. Facebook Live, so-called Live. It is a, I don't know, I feel like they're sabotaging, but, you know, it is what it is. But we're gonna go on. Anywho. We are live at the House of Reawakening Minds with our brother, our friend, our teacher, Grand Sheik, Master Teacher, Taj Tarik Bey. Come on, let's welcome him.
One of the things I wanted to share with everyone, and this is one of our favorites.
Get the mic.
All right. This is from
Okay.
and this is from the Mysteries of the Secret Brotherhood of the East. And these are higher degrees of Gnostic philosophies, as well as what many people know as the other part of the Circle 7. Keep in mind, all priests have this information, but the chapter will be self-explanatory as to why. Yes. Yeah, the chapter will be self-explanatory why the priesthood are reluctant for the common people to have availability of this literature. And this is interesting because this involves a lot of our conversations in development and trying to help people. And this is from the Secret Brotherhood of the East, Chapter 8. The Council of the Seven of the World. Can you hear me? Everyone can hear me? All right. In every age, since time began, but 7 sages lived. At first of every age, these sages meet to note the course of nations, people, tribes, and tongues. To note how far toward justice and love the race has gone. To formulate the code of law, religious postulates, and plans of rule best suited to the coming age. An age had passed, and lo, another age had come. The sages must convene. Now, Alexandria was the center of the world's best thought, and here in Philo's home, the sages met. From China came Mengste, from India Vidyapati came, from Persia Caspar came, and from Assyria Ashbina came, from Greece Apollo came. Methana was the Egyptian sage, and Philo was the chief of Hebrew thought. The time was due. The council met and sat in silence 7 days. And Mengste rose and said, "The wheel of time has turned once more. The race is on a higher plane of thought." We hail, the garments that our fathers wore have given out. The cherubim have woven a celestial cloth, have placed it in our hands, and we will make for men new garbs. The sons of men are looking up for greater light. No longer do they care for gods hewn out of wood. They seek for Allah not made with hands. They see the beams of the coming days and yet comprehend them not. The time is ripe, and we must fashion well these garments for the race. And let us make for men new garbs of justice, mercy, and love, that they may hide their nakedness when shines the light of the coming days. And Vidyapati said, our priests have all gone mad. They saw a demon in the wilds, and at him cast their lamps. And they are broken up, and not a gleam of light has any priest for men. The night is dark, the heart of India calls for light. The priesthood cannot be reformed. It is already dead.
Islam.
Its greatest needs are graves and funeral chants. The New Age calls for liberty, the kind that makes each man a priest, enables him to go alone and lay his offerings on the shrine of Allah. And Casper said, in Persia people walk in fear. They do the good for fear to do the wrong. The devil is the greatest power in our land, and though a myth, he dandles on his knees both youth and age. Our land is dark, and evil prospers in the dark. Fear rides on every passing breeze and lurks in every form of life. The fear of evil is a myth, is an illusion and a snare, but it will live until some mighty power shall come to raise the ethers to the plane of light. When this shall come to pass, the Magian land will glory in the light, and the soul of Persia calls for light.
Islam.
That's one of the great Gnostic passages that the priesthood try to hide from people, because they don't know that the priesthood has been the problem. And this is one of the reasons why the evils on the planet have ingrained themselves so deeply, because they've actually been guided by the priesthood themselves. The ones who have been least suspected has been actually in partnership with the lower light. And this is why people from no matter what so-called religion they claim, all they see is misery, broken families, jail, drugs, IRS taking their stuff, and the corporate states stealing people's properties and stealing their estates, stealing their pension funds and doing everything else. And the priesthood sitting around talking about salvation and Savior, etc., while they're getting a 501c3 kickback in the back door to keep the mystery system going, which they know they have been misguiding the people. However, you know, we're going to deal with some of the things that the priesthood has done so that the people, in their own responsibility, can honor their mothers and fathers and remove themselves by will
Islam.
from the clasp of the Roman emperors and their bishopric operatives and their minions and their familiars, because that's what runs the planet. And as we were talking earlier, you know, a lot of people, when they're dealing with the social conditions, socio-economic conditions of the peoples, they're usually trained to speak in terms of connotative linguistics relative to racism and slavery and stuff like that, and color games, etc., when really they're suffering under unum sanctum policy. And so the unum sanctum policy is the major rule, bulla, from which all European, Roman, colonial operatives enforce their so-called policies. Right on down to the gangs of New York that was formulated in New York that are now called policemen, that actually have a secret agreement with the United States Corporation Company that was bankrupted in France to overthrow the Republic. And so when people have a misunderstanding on the operations of these different people in our community, we need to know why. And it doesn't mean that everyone who's a member of the police are necessarily going into those orders for that purpose, but that's what the order was set up for. So the gangs of New York is actually Europeans who agreed to be vigilantes and start dressing up looking official, but their major mission was to dishevel, create disorder, and dismantle civility in targeted neighborhoods. And of course you see it every day, but people get confused because their miseducation is based in the idea, which is false, that these people are empowered to enforce constitutional law for protecting the people. They are not. They are put in position to protect the interests of the United States Service Corporation and members of the Roman Curia. They are literally Roman soldiers. And this is why you see some of the untoward things that they do, and then you see no recompense. Or you see whenever they need organs, they'll target some young male or young sister and murder them on the street, steal their organs, and you see no justice, and people get confused when they see things like that because in their imagination they think those people are law officers. They are not. They're enforcers of unum sanctum policy. And it's unfortunate, but it's a truth and a reality. And however, it must be understood that that for maintaining colonial operations, certain moral and ethical principles must be thrown out the door. In other words, it's done for the sake of the empire. So even though certain things are done in an untoward way, they may appear impersonal, but they are impersonal because it's for the empire. And this must be understood. This really must be understood. However, keep in mind, as all corporate entities in the Western Hemisphere come under the Roman Curia, they all operate from those playbooks. And for those of you who don't know, many of you are scholars and already know, but those of you who don't know, these are the fundamental collective bullas that are the playbook or from which they make their policies. And it's called Unum Sanctum, Nom De Guerre, Romanus Pontifex, Inter Caetera Divina, Sisticu V Act of 1666. And from those bullas come what has been traditionally used in the colorable courtrooms to attack our people, and that is called the Doctrine of Discovery. And under the Doctrine of Discovery, they use that operation to gentrify neighborhoods where Aboriginal people live and domicile, and you're targeted. And keep in mind, including the hypothecation practices that were instituted in 1861 and in 1868 after they closed the Freedmen's Bureau, reinforced by Woodrow Wilson and reinforced again by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, etc. You must understand that all of these policies made by these praetors, who you know as presidents, were actually tied to unum sanctum policy. And it's quite uncomfortable for people who have been miseducated, who really think that these people are operating in your interest and that they just simply don't understand your needs, or they have no idea that you're somebody, that type of thing. Wrong concept. You know, they've been waging war on us since 1492. You know, and of course, you all know that the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which Obama brought to your attention when he went to Egypt, is the world's longest running treaty. But of course, you know that most of the people here in the North Gate think that human beings are crayons, so they don't know that he was talking to them. You know, so they don't relate to that. However, in law, it makes them incompetent. And so it's quite difficult to liberate people when they don't know their own bloodline. And then from an inheritable point of view, and from a fact of right of law of inheritance of a state, not knowing the Nom De Guerre were put in place to make the people non-heritable. And this is why a lot of times, even when people begin to have some comprehension of these processes or the theft of the birthright, that is difficult to bring them to a proper concept of mind in order to address these things, because they will mix what is called the connotative linguistics with denotation, and of course be declared incompetent, not knowing that they're being declared incompetent. And so part of what we're talking about is, identity crisis and the Nom De Guerre. And so I want to share with you a little bit of lesson book 1. And some of you have it, but some of you don't. But I'm going to read from it anyway. I would put it up on the board, but it's on one of my other computers, in one of the other hard drives. But I want to read a little bit from lesson book 1. And lesson book 1 is who are the Moorish Americans? Moors defined. And of course, Moors order the Roundtable. Now, who are the Moorish Americans? Moors defined. Lesson number 1. In this modern era of technology, enlightenment, and split-second communications, there still exists a large body of people who think the nations of the earth are identified by shades and colors. False. The nations of the earth are identified by pedigree and nationality, not by colors. In spite of the religiously taught specter of the existence of a light-skinned black nation or a dark-skinned white nation, it is all a lie. Ignorance is a cultivated business for both usury and oppression. In the United States society, USA, many trusted people are agents to this vulture. The benefactors of mass ignorance dread the exposure of this information because it exposes their true motives and hinders their license to usury. Nevertheless, truth must be told to clear the mind, thus lesson number 1, Moors defined. Preface. Economic, social, and color of law abuses, human rights violations buried in the false and void civil rights arguments of race fiction merely scratch the surface of the deleterious issues plaguing the dark olive Asiatics of the Americas, particularly those who are labeled black, Negro, colored, etc. Now, there is focused taxation without representation, forced and coerced adhesion contracts, license to live laws, license to own laws, and property confiscation without lawful due process. And this is the normal and consistent function, connotatively referred to as slavery, under the assumed jurisdiction of the United States of America Corporation and its quasi-government and state agencies. Now, many agencies, peoples, institutions, and organizations appear to help, but actually make their livings, fortunes, dealing with and promoting the arguments surrounding the so-called black people's problems. Sociologists, politicians, writers, and many religionists claim that the above-stated problems emanate from a lack of self-esteem. A lack of jobs, a lack of education, and other seemingly relative issues and or disciplines. The truth is, the problems are the symptoms, not the root causes, of the oppression and the denial of citizens' rights in the Union State Society jurisdiction. The following are the major root causes of the above stated problems. 1, a lack of knowledge of self, which is tied to parentage. Now, the knowledge of self being tied to parentage, that is what you will see traditionally in, say, like Septuaginta, the Bible, Quran, holy books where it says, honor your mothers and your fathers that your days may be longer upon the earth land. So you're tied to your ancient mothers and fathers, and the knowledge of it is how, in civil law, inheritances are passed from one generation to another. And it has always been that way on the earth planet. And a failure to honor your mothers and fathers-in-law makes you non-descendable. This is one of the reasons why the Europeans created the Nom De Guerre operations, or the branding system, to take the people out of their birthright pedigree attributes. And by doing that, when our people started agreeing to be Negro, black, and colored, etc., they didn't know that it actually made them non-descendable. And all scholars know that, anybody who knows law knows that, and anybody that knows civilization knows that. It has nothing to do with what their beliefs are or what their beliefs are not. It has everything to do with how Earth operates, how civilization operates on the planet. Where any man or woman who fails to honor their mothers and fathers in law are not descendable. So this must be understood that the branding system set up by Rome was not accidental. It was not just a nasty idea that they thought of doing or practicing. It had legal and lawful applications and functions purposefully. And this is also why, even after removal of the attributes and names of the forefathers of the ancient Canaanite Moabites, modernly called Al-Moroccans, means descendants of Moroccans, corruptedly is called Americans, in short they're called Moors. And these are the people who have hair like lamb's wool, skin like burnished brass, who think that human beings are crayons. and so that's an unfortunate situation, not knowing that that is connotative linguistics that was introduced to them. It's not a natural part of civilization or culture. However, their willingness to adopt these Nom De Guerre has actually taken them off the platform of international law protections, which is why it was done, of course. The interesting thing is that all scholars already know this, and the more interesting thing is that it's knowable even by children. All you have to do is take them to a basic, decent dictionary that has etymology in it, and a child can see it, a third grader can see it. And of course, we're not going to go through that because most of you already know that. That's elementary stuff. However, this is one of the reasons, and we were talking earlier, why a few months ago, as we were talking, why we took the Dungy case out of the lesson book and then start spreading it, in a few pages with a few editorials, because immediately as you see the people start developing, automatically you have COINTELPRO trolls that will come out to try to minimize this information or try to make it seem like it's some kind of religious belief or some kind of stuff that somebody made up, not knowing. And they can only get away with people who can't read, but anybody can read, they can get past that. And so that's one of the reasons why we shared the Dungy case. But anyway, let's move on, and I want to hit on a few things here. When you had put up the post, Dr. Naila, when you put up the post, were there any particular specific questions that came up on a regular basis?
No, they were just basically sharing the fact that you're going to be here, so nobody.
All right, so they're good on that. All right. Now, years ago, myself and Brother Abdullah Iltalib Mosley Bey had did a class actually in elementary school, in Whittier School years ago. It had to be at least 15 years ago. It might have been more than that. Yeah, we did it for actually second graders at Whittier School in Camden. And the surprising thing about it was so effective with the children that they asked us to come back, and the next day they took a couple more classes, and they broke them down into the second grade class, and we did it again. And as a matter of fact, that was during the time when Julie started taking etymology classes more seriously, and of course you would know that Abdullah's a teacher too. So that is what inspired him to take it further, which he went into later. But anyway, I want to present to you all to clear up certain concepts, because one of the things that we need to do is to remove a lot of the biases that exist amongst ourselves. We often are trained to look at the biases of Europeans who've been taking advantage of us truly. Nevertheless, what we can do, justice and nature does not recognize person or station. And so what we need to do is get rid of a lot of misconceptions that we have. And that will be done by study, by knowing, by reading again, and going into philologies. But I want to read to you all, something, and I want to see what your response is, and then I will return to you in response to how you respond to this. This is a charter and object of an order. And I want to read it to you, and I want you all to interplay with me. I want you to interplay with me. Can you give them the mic for anyone who wants to speak? Whoever has the mic. And then we're going to go into this, but I want you to recognize that that in spite of the fact that we're under occupation, it doesn't mean that everything that the European says is wrong, and it doesn't mean that everything that an Asiatic says is right. So you must know principles, you must know justice. If you want justice, you yourself must be just. And so keep in mind while we're in the struggle to solve these problems with our people that we must not lean out of passion into the dark side, because nature does not recognize that. She recognizes only merit. You keep that in mind. And I know it's frustrating because Rome has been doing quite some terrible things to us. But you must understand that Rome was in our servitude first. It's just that so many generations have passed that we forgot our bloodline and forgot our history. And because we've been injured so much, in current life, in current form, that we forget that we are who our forefathers were, without doubt or contradiction.
Islam.
And from generation to generation, those responsibilities still lay, because nature commands it that way. Are we clear?
Islam.
And so this is why when the hand of reconciliation is passed, or when the resurrection of the people is come, that you must come with a pure heart. And it's rough, yes, I know it is, but you still got to come with a pure heart. You mean that's why Dwali said to us, we need to know of our higher self and our lower selves. But keep in mind, I'm going to read to you a fundamental charter and objects of the order. And I want to see where you object to this. All right? Charter and objects of the order. This is an institution of chivalry, humanity, mercy, and patriotism, embodying in its genius and in its principles all that is chivalric and patriotic in purpose. Its peculiar objects being, first, to protect the weak, the innocent, and the defenseless from the indignities, wrongs, and outrages of the lawless, the violent, and the brutal, to relieve the injured and oppressed, to succor the suffering and unfortunate, and especially the widows and orphans of Confederate soldiers. Second, to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and all laws passed in conformity thereto, and to protect the states and the people thereof from any invasion from any source whatever. Excuse me, let me turn the page. Third, to aid and assist in the execution of all constitutional laws and to protect the people from unlawful seizure and from trial except by their peers in conformity to the laws of the land. That's the general charter. Where do you find, if anyone finds anything objective, that they object to that? Can you speak up?
Are you talking about the people of the land?
That's the charter I just read.
For the people of the land, right?
That's a charter I read. I went from what I read. If there's something that's objectionable or negative in it, speak up.
The Europeans have been doing it ever since they came.
Can you give them a mic?
The settlers. The settlers.
Anyway, so I'm going to say this to you so that you're aware. That is the charter and order for the Ku Klux Klan.
Right, I was gonna say, I ain't getting that, cause that ain't, right. No, that's-
Do you understand?
Yeah, that's wrong.
Now, how many of our people just reject them right off the back just because they're Europeans?
What?
And this is, and I'm presenting that to you so that you can understand how much division and how much hatred exists in the world unnecessarily, just based on people really not having an understanding and automatically starting to fight each other. And having an opinion that is not necessarily true. Are we clear? Does that mean that every Klaner operates on that charter? No, but that is the charter. Now, and the reason I wanted to share that with you, that's in lesson book 1, is because you have to recognize your own biases and prejudices that you've accused others of. And that automatically being hostile to someone is not necessarily always meritorious. Are we clear? Now, and then of course, a lot of the problems that exist in North America is because the European, by burying the true history, has also taken responsibility for some parts or aspects of slavery that actually have not his origin. Are we clear? You know, and so in order to fix these things and a lot of these problems that we have in the North Gate, it's important for the true history to be taught in order that we uplift this of each other. And keep in mind that the ancestors and nature herself will aid us when we come with a pure heart. You come with a dirty heart and the bull continues. And I don't have to tell you, the bull has been continuing because the bull, Sitzkidorf, has been continuing. And, you know, we need to understand these things, you know. So I just wanted to share that with you from lesson book 1, but also understand the motive of Roman operations in the Western Hemisphere. And likewise, just like when you read the charter of the Klan, you know, a lot of times Europeans assume that if we're disagreeing with the political order, that we're contrary. But the very principle of constitutional enforcement of the Klan is the very principle of the constitution of the Moorish movement. You see? Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Really?
Islam.
And on the surface, a lot of people would never think about that. And one of the things that remind me of that was when I was in Atlanta in '91. In '91, when I was going to be short, I was going to the movies down on Ponce de Leon after I came in from work. And Klanners came in the car behind me. And I had a white New Yorker, red interior. They had a dark blue New Yorker with a blue interior. And they had, you know, the Confederate flag on it, etc. And of course, it didn't offend me because I already know it's the Constellation.
Islam.
If you understand what I'm
Islam.
saying. People who don't understand the history take offense to it. Not knowing belongs to them too. Do you understand? Because they don't know their own history. You know, and this is where that white and black thing, which is a code system, come in and it actually creates unnecessary division. And anyway, when I was going up that movie, what was it? Living Large was playing at the time, something like that. And I was going up the step. They came in behind me, was 2 men and a woman. And they walked past me real fast, and they went up on the step. It was steps about sort of like that platform, with no more than that at the doors in the back, because you had to go in the back of the mall to go into the movie. So anyway, they stopped at the door, and immediately I'm going into military mentally, waiting for the Negro Acts type thing. you know, it's like my own bias, whatever. Anyway, so this really spoiled my day too, because they had no intention didn't intend on losing, didn't matter. Anyway, But they, the woman and the man stood at the door to the left, and another guy stood at the door, and they opened the doors, and they said, "Top of the morning to you," and they, bowed like that. And that kind of like threw me off because I had a whole different idea. But anyway, that bothered me for a while because I expected the negative, if you understand. And I couldn't even really enjoy the movie because my adrenaline was up because I'm ready to go do the Frankenstein thing. Anyway.